the inspiration for the Jewish community, and her renown and her fame has traveled all the way to Palm Beach and beyond. And we invited her to come to our shul because we heard about her organization, her work, and her wonderful inspirational series of talks that she gives. And we're delighted to have her here. So I want to welcome Rebbetzin Adina Stilerman for the first time to the Palm Beach Synagogue community. And she's going to speak for about 45 minutes. And the last 15 minutes will be reserved for questions and answers. So everyone will be on mute, but at the end, you'll have a chance to type your question in, and we will pose your questions. Or maybe you could unmute yourself and ask your question directly, if you like, to Rebbetzin Adina Stilerman. Since yesterday was Mother's Day, today's topic is connected to Mother's Day, but it's not exclusively for mothers, although everyone has a mother, so we could all connect with Mother's Day. But the topic is standing on the shoulders of giants. So we welcome Rebbetzin Adina Stilerman, and thank you for giving us your time. And welcome, and please turn your attention to Rebbetzin Adina Stilerman.
There we go. Thank you, Rabbi Shiner, for having me on this lovely morning. It's a little bit sobering that the only thing that I get to meet of your synagogue is a few names on the screen. And Amy, thank you for donating your face to give me someone to speak to. And Abraham as well, thank you for having your video camera on. So I have two lovely people besides Rabbi Shiner to speak to. And anybody else is welcome to turn on your video camera to give me more people to meet, because it is very sad for me that I couldn't come and meet people. Oh, we have a few more donations here. Sandy and Renee and Judy. Yay, wonderful. We've got a group.
Spotlighter.
So Rabbi Shiner, do you want to put yourself on mute? Okay. Thank you for joining in. So my name's Adina Stilerman. I actually, I escaped from my home where I have my 5 biological children and 1 foster child, all cooped up under quarantine. And the reason why I offered to, instead of, in place of the Stilerman residence opportunity to come and do it on Zoom, is because I need a break. That's why I'm here. But it's very nice to be able to speak to grown adults and to have an amazing conversation, especially in light of Mother's Day. And Mother's Day under quarantine, I think, sheds new light on the prism of relationships and how there are so many different ways to be able to tap into the depth that we can experience, and the profundity, the emotional profundity that we can have with another person, especially when it comes to the person who's responsible for us coming into this world. So one of the things I found to be so magical is that through our work, the logo of our organization is behind me. This is where I speak almost every single day for our students across the state. We have 6 locations. And one of the rabbis came up with the idea that since a lot of the college students and young professionals that we reach out to and inspire, we always say that our goal is to keep them inspired from the time they leave their home until they build their own home, that they should build a solid Jewish home. And so one of the rabbis came up with the idea that since they're home, why not do mother-daughter classes? And we just did a few of them, and it was magical to see mothers and daughters cozying up in the couch and learning Torah together. And you will see through the next class, the next 45 minutes or so that we have together, why I find it to be so magical. Because it's not just about the mother-daughter relationship. I believe that it is the mothers of the Jewish people, or the women of the Jewish people, that we attribute the success up until this point of our Jewish nation, and we will attribute the future. And so this class is very dear to my heart. As you see, I made a hobby of mine to become a mother, 6 times over, plus 1 more. My foster teenager, God bless her soul. But I think that what's so remarkable is that when we read the Torah, looking from a different lens, like often what I find to be troubling for us, being that we are so intimately familiar with the text, we're so familiar with the stories that we almost have what we call the lullaby effect. We're plagued by it. What's this lullaby effect? A common lullaby would be, rock-a-bye baby on the treetop, when the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall, and down will come baby cradle. And all this is very familiar. There's not a single person that's tuned in that isn't familiar with this tune and the song. However, if I told you the lyrics and you would look at it from with a discerning eye, rock-a-bye baby on the treetop. This is not a rated G song. This is not something that I would compose to sing to my children if I wanted them to drift off to sleep. Why did it catch on? Why, and this is the operative question, why is it that no child asked questions? Questions like, if it was a child that heard the song for the first time, they should sit up abruptly from their pillow and say, wait a minute, Mom, do not leave my room. I have many questions for you. Namely, what was the distance from the bough to the ground? Did the child survive? Did someone call an ambulance? Did someone, was the mother prosecuted? There's so many questions to be asked. And most importantly, why are you singing this to me? Are you trying to kill me? There are so many questions the child should be asking, should the child be listening to the lyrics. But unfortunately, since before the child had mastered English language and before the child has even understood what it is that it means to communicate, the child has heard the tune and the loving nature of what it means to be in the mother's arms as she's singing. And well before the child began to understand the words, that child drowned out the lyrics with the loving embrace of the mother. So on the one hand, we have accepted tradition and the stories within the Torah. We've accepted it at face value because we felt such love in the embrace of it. However, we have forgotten to ask basic questions and to look at it from a discerning lens. Recently, of course, being in quarantine, it means my children, and for better or for worse, are watching more movies than usual. And there was a new Lion King that came out, which I felt I was forced to have to sit and watch with my children. It's not necessarily my choice of viewing material, but Lion King, the very first one, I just turned 38 years old a few days ago, and Lion King was part of my childhood, the original version. So how do you think I felt as I was watching the film? My children were gripped with the plot and the story, wanting to know what would happen at the end, but I know what happens at the end, and therefore I was fighting the urge to fall asleep. If we read the Torah knowing the end of the story already, then we might be missing out on some key pieces. If we know what happens at the end of the Exodus story, at the end of Yetzias Mitzrayim, is it quite possible that we might be missing out on some of the breathtakingly beautiful details that shape us in terms of who we are today? And therefore, if we read the Torah as if it's a fresh lens, and one of the things that I find to be so refreshing for me personally as an educator that really focuses on people that don't have a Torah education. So then they point out to me some of the questions that I should have had all along, my whole life as I've been learning. So I would like to look at it from a fresh lens. I would like to look at the Torah as not fragmented or compartmentalized stories, with whether it's Joseph and the brothers, or whether it's the laws towards the end, or whether it's an Adam and Eve in the beginning, because we do have it fragmented each week as we read it in the read the Torah in shul. But is it all one story? I would like to hypothesize that it's all one story with an opening, with a closing, that maybe it's that classic when we analyze literature with the exposition, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and then we have the conclusion at the end. What's the climax of the story? What is that rising action? When are we setting the tone? When are we introducing the characters? And most importantly, and this is where it all becomes magnificent, how are all the characters related? Are they really all one character? Are they really all the character that lies within us today in 2020? Is this the story of me and you? And of course, if we are going to analyze the story of me and you, if we're going to analyze what it is all about, I have to dip into the power of women because that's the theme. But I would hypothesize that it is the theme of the Torah as we know it, that Wonder Woman figure, that somehow she dips in time of need, cape and all, dips in to somehow save the Jewish nation, but very different than the Marvel series. The Marvel series is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It is now I believe it's number one. Though I think the last one that they did, the big shebang, it ranks number one in terms of ticket sales. So this is obviously a very appealing story. Of course, Marvel was created by a Jew, quite possibly, maybe after some of the stories in the Torah. But it's a little different when it comes to the women, because the classic superhero that comes in to swoop in, save humanity from some type of evil figure, very often the women are not saving people, or the Jewish people, from this one evil character. They are saving us from something far more dangerous. It's the evil from within us, the good people. It's a whole different, it's like a paradigm shift in terms of what it means to be a superhero. But as women, often we are tempted to save and bring people out against their will, where we look at evil as something external, as often we think we're that type of superhero. And I would like to, with your permission, go back to the beginning of all time, the very first introduction of femininity on the scene of all of humanity. Because the rule of thumb when it comes to Jewish learning and analyzing the text of the Torah and different concepts and philosophies that come up within the Torah, one must look at the first time a concept is mentioned. And if you go all the way back to the first time a concept is mentioned, you will unravel the deepest secrets of that concept. So if we want to talk about marriage, one should not look at Noach and his wife, or Avram and his wife, or any of the other matriarchs and patriarchs as the ultimate paradigm of the connection of the sexes. One must look at the very first time it comes on the scene, when they're first split and become that separate creation. Maybe within that context, we'll understand what a woman is. And then I'd like to take you on a fascinating journey through biblical history, ending off with what we have today in modern history and how we can apply that. Now, why is this so important? Because women are attacked for various reasons in today's day and age. If one is too public, then she's too loud and rambunctious. If she's too private, then she's too timid. If she's not educated enough, if she's educated, too much, then she might be intimidating. She should go in and get a degree, or she should be a stay-at-home mom. She should be thin enough, but not too thin, because she should be made up enough, but not too made up enough, because then she's not being natural, no filters, hashtag. We are so criticized. The public has an opinion in terms of who we are meant to be, but what is the truth? How can we get to the truth of what the greatness of a woman really is according to Jewish values? That's our goal. So let's open up the curtains. The scene of history, when the woman Chava, some know her as Eve, first come into the scene. From this point forward, I call her Chava. She's the Aim Kol Chai, which is a huge compliment, and I would not want to pass on the opportunity of complimenting her for who she is, especially in the light of maybe highlighting some of the misunderstandings or mistakes that she had as that Aim Kol Chai, as the mother of all life. Now, some people find it uncomfortable when I point out mistakes of Chava, but truth be told, if I were going to sum up the Torah in one sweeping motion, I would say it's the story of people's mistakes. It's one of the most anti-Semitic books in history. It basically highlights and puts a spotlight on what everybody did wrong, but how they became great because of what they did wrong, not despite what they did wrong. And that's why it's crucial to open up her character in that way. The Torah says, and we're all familiar with this, but remember, our job is to break that lullaby effect. The Torah says that Adam and Eve were created as one, an androgynous being with dual sexual organs intertwined, with two faces, says the Gemara, two faces back to back. And when Hashem separated them, he turned them around, faced them towards each other, and now he says, now you try to make this thing called marriage work. Much easier when you're attached and you're one brain and one mind and you're in one place. What was created when they were separated? This thing called an achorah, their backside, We call this Sitra Achra, which is like the evil forces of the world. An Achara is not a complementary part of a human being. It's what bothers us most in marriage. It's what most people don't know about our spouse, but we know very, very well. And it's what keeps presenting challenges in our marriage. And Hashem gives us the mitzvah of being a basar echad, a one unit, in light of the fact that we now have a new dimension to who we are once we are separated. And when Chava is created, there is a crucial story that happens. That is the reason why the word Eve came to be, and why she was called evil, because it was looked at from the surface point that she was the root of all evil. She brought down mankind as we know it by feeding him the apple, did she not? And the question is that true? So let's look at that story. The first interaction that we have in terms of their marital relationship is not a pleasant one. When Hashem creates this garden, he says, I will create this Eitz Hada'at Tov V'Ra, the tree of a knowledge of good and evil, which is often just known as the tree of knowledge, because we think that there's something wrong with knowing. But if we understand that it's a tree of knowledge of good and evil, then we can understand that the word knowledge is not the way we translate it in our modern day English vernacular. The word knowledge, da'as, is also a word that is used for marital intimacy. When two people are sexually intimate on a very deep level, da'as, we know that because it says Adam yada et Chava, that Adam knew his wife Chava, and then we know that she is pregnant, so then you can make the natural deduction yourself. What is the connection between this Eitz HaDa'as Tov V'Ra, this concept of das, and why is it that also used to describe marital intimacy? And obviously, if you have one word that has two definitions, those two definitions are attached or they are connected at its core. That means that if I were going to replace that word knowledge with intimacy, or what we call oneness, then let's plant that translation back into the tree of knowledge, and you'll see that it's the tree of oneness of good and evil. It's what produced what we call dimyon in the world, where there's imagination, where you could think of things that don't exist and dream for things and work your whole life for these things, but it is absolutely not in existence and it never will be. It's the reason why my child wants to grow up to be a mermaid. Last I checked, there was no such thing. Animals are not affected by that tree of oneness between good and evil or that imagination, because they only know that which is true in this world. No animal wants to grow up to be that which doesn't exist, or no animal wants to take on a role in their life that wasn't intended for them, which is the very definition of tov as we know it in the Torah. The first time the word good is present in the scene, it is very far from the way we understand good, and it's important to understand tov and ra according to biblical definitions, because if we look at it as modern day definitions, we'll have a completely different type of story. Namely, if I would say that these sunglasses are good sunglasses, I just grabbed the nearest item next to me, but if I would say that these are good sunglasses, it's not that they are beautiful sunglasses or pretty sunglasses. If one of them was missing one of these shades and it was broken, which unfortunately happens quite frequently when you have 6 little kids, so then it would be called a bad pair of sunglasses. No matter how expensive they are, no matter how beautiful they are, they would be considered a bad pair of sunglasses. But if I say they're a good pair of sunglasses, it means they serve its purpose, which means when I drove here using them, they blocked my eyes from the shade, which is why they're there in the first place. Now, putting fashion aside, where things like sunglasses no longer serve their purpose and they're just there to beautify the face, that is the definition of tov in the Torah after each day of creation. Hashem says ki tov, not as if he's patting himself on the back, but he says ki tov because it served its function. Ra, by definition, means it is disconnected from its purpose in this world. The word disconnect, I'll tell you a fun fact. On Rosh Hashanah, we blow the shofar. And we have tikiyah, which is a long, seamless, connected sound from blower, shofar, through to the ear of those who are listening. Then we have shvarim, and then we have truah, which is the most broken of all sounds. The root of truah is that word ra, which means broken. The brokenness from its original purpose and why it was planted in the world, that brokenness is the very purpose, is the very understanding of evil as we know it, not like the evil characters in the Marvel series and as Hollywood presents it. And tov means it serves its purpose. And then it says, lo tov lios adam malvado. It's not good for man to be alone. And one would naturally deduce that it means that woman must be a catalyst for, you guessed it, good. Any of those who are married on the line, that is a nice perk that you can bring up any point in time on the best thing that ever happened to you, so says the Torah. However, we also have this concept of tree, which was crucial for their perception of the world and colored their perception once they engaged in eating from it, which was that now this concept of tov and ra, connection to purpose and disconnection from purpose, now are one, and they're intertwined. And that's how you see human history unfolding, with very, very different understandings of what good and bad are. Even today, you can have two people sitting at the same table who grew up in the same country, who might have even grown up in the same city. And one of them believes fervently that abortion is something that is the evil of all mankind. And the next person sitting right next to her thinks it's the savior for all mankind. Thinks it's two people thinking two diametrically opposite things passionately, yet they are born in the same world, even in the same generation. That is a result of the tree. So that what happens, how is it that man began to engage with this tree despite the fact that God obviously and made it quite clear to him that they were forbidden from engaging with it? And this is where we have this thing called the nachash, the snake. If we don't understand this nachash, we cannot understand mankind. We don't understand mankind. We don't understand how women fit within mankind. This nachash, the way it's described in the text, doesn't sound remotely similar to a snake as we know it today when we go to the local zoo. And this is a very unusual thing to see, because when we describe animals in the Torah, they're pretty much the same as the animals that we know today. When we go through the kashrus laws, they're not talking about different types of animals. If we're going, even Bilam and the donkey, there was a unique circumstance that was trying to create a point. But what was this snake? And why was a snake used to be able to describe what we call the Yetzer Hara, or that which brings man to betray his purpose? So the nachash, if we look at the spiritual world and the physical world as if they mirror each other with exquisite precision, one will be able to see the characteristics of not only the traditional snake as we know it, but the snake that's described in the Torah, and know why it is that he reverted back to being a traditional snake as we know it today after he helped them engage in sin. Watch this. The Torah describes that the nachash was, and I'll go into the text for you so you can see it. It says, "V'hanachash haya arum," that the nachash was very cunning. It's very, very smart. He was clever. And it also says that the nachash was walking. And it also mentions, and it's quite obvious based on the text, that he had the power of speech. Last I checked, snakes do not walk, they do not talk, and they're not any smarter than some other animals that we know to be quite intelligent. So why does the Torah describe this creature called the nachash as a snake? And why is it different than what we know as a snake today? When a creature walks and talks and is very smart, it sounds a lot more similar to, and any of you have gotten to this point, sounds a lot more similar to a human being. This is not a snake. This is something else. This is a nachash in the garden that sounds like a human being. And the conversation that he has with who? If he wants to bring down all of humanity, affect both genders, who does he approach first? He approaches not Adam, but Eve. And he knows by definition that based on Eve's character, that if he approaches her, he's got them both. Hold that in your pocket, because as we go through biblical history, this will come about as part of the tikkun of the Jewish nation, the fixer up of the Jewish nation, knowing that fact that the key to the Jewish people is through the women. When he approaches Chava, he says, I'll read in English to make sure everybody's comfortable with it. He says, did God perhaps say that you shouldn't eat from the tree of the garden? And she says, yes, that's true, that God said that you shouldn't eat or touch it from the tree, add something there. And what I find to be so interesting is that when he describes in subtle detail that it is if she eats from the garden, he doesn't say, well, if God says it, who says he's in charge here? That's not what he says. And he doesn't say, yes, but it's so delicious and so tasty, yet he does bring that up. He says it's a means to acquire wisdom. He taps into something he knows will be her weakness, something that is a deep desire within her. He taps into an altruistic part of her thinking, which is a very telling, tangentially, very telling understanding or piece of information of how that nachash, or that we call the yetzer hara, the evil inclination, how it works. So let's just digress for one moment. This nachash is crucial to understand today's day and age. I've heard over and over and over again about how women discuss about how they're gaining so much weight in quarantine. If I have to hear this one more time, I think I'm going to go bonkers. And the diets that they're going to be on once they experience freedom and they can eat wherever they want and go to the gym, etc. This is not something new to quarantine. This is unfortunately something that is within our culture, that somehow women are expected to be on a diet. I say food is meant to be enjoyed and nourished both body and soul, to appreciate that which we have. I'm a grandchild of 4 Holocaust survivors. I want to appreciate the food that which my grandparents didn't have during the war. That being said, let's say you are on a diet, right? And something that is your weakness is chocolate. And when you go to a party, there's a beautiful platter of the most delectable quality chocolates from, I don't know, Belgium, right? These delicious Belgian chocolates. And this is your weakness. Now, you started your diet last week. Quarantine was over. What is the voice that you hear inside your head? And it is most definitely not the voice of, but it's just so good. Who cares? Eat it anyway. And if I were to unmute everybody here, which I am under, I want to make sure we get to all the information. I'm going to give the answers for you. I have an X-ray vision of your head, and I know those voices. You ready for this? One voice is, you know what? You just started your diet last week. You can just start it again tomorrow. I'll start again tomorrow is one of those voices. And what's another one of those voices? Another one of those voices, I'll work it off. I'm going to go to the gym for an extra hour and I'm going to work off those calories. And you know what else your voice says? Just one bite. Just one bite. What can one bite do to your body? That can't be such a big deal. One bite. Before you know it, half the platter is gone and you run for the hills because you don't want anybody to know that you're the culprit. And most importantly, what's the last voice that you hear inside your head when all else fails? That last voice says, you were so good this week. Look how good you were. You were so strict on that diet. You deserve this chocolate. All of a sudden, what was forbidden a minute ago is now a mitzvah. Now, not only should you engage, but this is something Hashem is proud of you, and you are proud of yourself because you've done so well that you deserve this chocolate. And then one thing leads to the next, and you polished off half. And then what happens the moment you engage? The moment you succumb to those voices, what happens? What sounded like your own will, it sounded like it was a wise place. It walked, it talked, and it was very, very wise. It told me what was good for me. It addressed a higher calling within me, my higher desires. It didn't address the lower desires. What happens the moment you eat from it? The curse was he went right back to a snake. Legs were taken off, lost his power of speech, and he wanders and eats dust of the earth. And a man looks at it and says, oh, I know exactly where that was coming from. I feel sick. I regret it deeply. That wasn't my higher calling. That was my voice. That was a voice of a nachash masking as a human being. Renee agrees with me. And Amy also, I see that nod. She's like, I've been there, woman. I know exactly what you're talking about. That voice, it's so crucial to understand that the nachash does not have legs from that point forward. The nachash doesn't take definable, concrete steps to enter into your mind and affect your behavior. The nachash creeps. The snake creeps slowly to the point that you don't even know when or how it went from point A to point B. And the nachash has no redeemable value. It has a bite that is so powerful. Even though it's so low down, it's smaller than even your heel, but it can take down the entire person in one sweeping bite. What other animal should the Torah use but this? That it is reflecting the spiritual understanding of what the Yetzer Hara does and how it climbs into the mind of a woman and a man, both equally. Let's take these thoughts, and I want to discuss something that is highly controversial. Nobody likes to talk about. I believe that the Torah is a book to be learned from cover to cover. And if one doesn't understand something on the superficial understanding when just reading from it, it is an iceberg moment, as we call it. It is it's begging us, it's calling us to dip beneath the surface and truly understand what is the Torah talking about, because it doesn't really make sense. You'll see grammatical changes for that in that way, and you'll also see things that really make you feel uncomfortable in today's culture. Namely, what happens? We know that the klala, the curse of Chava when she engages in the sin, and the curse of Adam was something that we're really meant to understand today in 220, because we are still plagued with this curse. Because Adam and Chava are really a representation of what we all as a collective humanity struggle with. It is not an accident that we have put man on the moon, but we can't even get a woman as president of the United States. And that the way women are looked at and treated, there's always that women's rights, women's issues, even in 2020. I've never heard man's rights, man's issues. Do they not have rights? Do they not have issues? Somehow they might have it easier when it comes to rights, I guess. And they have no issues in society. Is that possible? I don't believe that's necessarily true. But somehow women are always struggling to be able to maintain the dignity that they so rightly deserve. They're constantly being criticized, and they're constantly trying to grab at the rope that is moving farther and farther away from them to be treated as equals. A curse in the Torah is not a curse in the way we know it today, in its finality. A curse is where the rules of the game change, but the end and the goal of the game remains the same. It means that we have a different way to be able to achieve our goals, that there's a challenge, and that challenge allows us to rise to the occasion. And what was the curse that Chava was given? And this is where we get politically incorrect. It says that she was first given the pain of childbirth. And I believe everything that comes along with childbirth, truth be told, staying up all nights, and then dealing with their schoolwork, and then dealing with their dating issues, and then like the whole, kit and caboodle. Fanny, you're on the line. I see you're on the line. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I believe that the second one is quite interesting as well. It says that her husband will rule over her. Her desire will be for him. What does that mean? Her desire will be for him. To say that's not. Now, if you look at the current dating scene, and for better or for worse, since I deal with young professionals and college students, and now dealing with mothers on a regular basis, it is definitely an uneven playing field in the dating world today. It's not fair. If you look at the most rated G version, it's like always a woman has to wait for the man to propose to her. Why is that so? You know how long women wait with bated breath? Every vacation that he invites her on a cruise to go somewhere, and she thinks this is the time, and she picks her best, most picture perfect outfits thinking this will be the time. We've been dating for a year or two. Now he will propose. That's unfair. Why is it according to his will? Even today, how advanced we've become as a society. But yet she is waiting. He rules over her in that domain. If you look at the physical dimensions of human beings and the uneven understanding of the Olympics, the reason why a lot of the genders are separated is because it's just not an even playing field. He's physically more strong than her. Now, we've seen in intellectual components, they have absolute equality, although sometimes, and we don't know if it's a genetic or epigenetic thing, or whether it's a spiritual thing, who knows? But we know that sometimes women have strengths in certain areas of the brain. Men have been proven to have strengths in other areas of the brain that might change in 10 or 20 years from now, who knows? But just looking at the human body, we see that there is a dominance of the male world, for better or for worse. Yet it says something interesting. It says that her desire will be for her husband. And some people look at that as, she wants marriage more than he does. I think it goes deeper than that. Now, I just gave birth 5 months ago to a delicious, yummy little ball of gorgeousness little boy. His name is Eliyahu. And I know that one of the things that the Gemara says about a nursing mother is that it says that more than the calf wants to nurse from the mother or desires the mother desires the calf. That she has a desire to give. She spills over. She seeks for him so that she can give to him. It is an instinct for her. And that is what it is talking about, that she has a desire. She wants to spill over. She wants to give. She wants to be in that relationship. And the healthiest of women in the relationships do not enter into a relationship from the point of emptiness. If she comes into marriage that I'm empty and I need you to fill me emotionally, spiritually, even financially, then she might be coming from a very faulty platform. It is a woman that comes from a place of, I have invested so much in my spiritual growth. I've invested so much in my life. I want to share and give to you. And it is that woman who wants to spill over that we are talking about. So why is it occurs? It's because sometimes she's vulnerable. She wants to give, but he doesn't necessarily want her to give to her. To the point that maybe she might pick the wrong person to be in that relationship because she's so desperate to be in that relationship. But also we know that there was pain in childbirth that is such an important factor in terms of her destiny. Because what does pain come along with? There are 2 sides of the coin. On the one hand, vulnerability comes. That she knows that as she's screaming in pain, who does she turn to? She's scared. She turns to God and she's like, can't do this alone. Or today we might turn to modern medicine. I can't do this alone. Many women are afraid to give birth at home because their life is at risk. She's vulnerable as she produces human life. But there's another thing, and this is where we want to go to the point where she gives birth to her first child, where she masters and she tastes for the very first time her destiny as the Aim Kol Chai, as the mother of all life. Now, remember, if you are familiar, as a woman, I'm now very, very familiar as what it means to bring life into this world. And I was familiar even before. I kind of knew I had what to expect while you're expecting. And I had my mother's chirping voice in my ear saying, like, don't do this, and you should do this, and make sure that you are forewarned, and this is how you have the easiest labor, and this is how you raise children. I had a very hefty resource to be able to draw from, but not so with Chava. Chava was the first one to experience the empowering sensation of what it meant to bring life into the world. The only other power she knew that brought life into this world was God himself. Am I God? Said Chava. If now he entrusts me with this power, I must have I have a godlike power in this world, which can be misused. And watch how we see that happen. It says that when she gives birth, she names her first child Cain. Why does she name him Cain? It says, Kaniti ish et Hashem. That I acquired, if you ever go to Israel, if you speak Hebrew, I would say raise your hand if you speak Hebrew, but I would only know 3 or 4 people whether they speak Hebrew. But Amy's raising her hand. Kitzat, she says. Sandy, do you speak Hebrew at all? Kitzat. Fanny speaks a lot more Hebrew, I know, because Fanny and I are very lucky that we learn every week together. We have a chavruta. But what's so remarkable is that this concept of kaniti still exists today in modern day Hebrew. I went to the store and I bought something. That we use that word that I acquired and belongs to me. I bought it fair and square. If I were a woman who just gave birth to the very first child in all of human history, I might have used a different word like to create. I've created the first human being. Wouldn't you agree? What is this concept of buying? The very transaction of a purchase, and I use the word transaction, it means I gave something up in order to make something mine. If I created something, it doesn't mean I might have given something up or I sacrificed whatsoever. And it doesn't necessarily, they won't make the natural deduction that it is something that you intend to own. Because if I own a business, like a jewelry business, let's say, or if I sell televisions, I create them in order to sell them to other people. So by virtue of the fact that she used the word kaniti, it means that she is making two assumptions. It means that she knows that she sacrificed for it and she gave something up for it. And it also means that she thinks that she owns it. Are you following? And that means that we are also introducing not just the birth of the first child, but we're introducing a very large misconception of mothers that we own that child. Now, how do we know that? Like, I know that if we have birth stories, I'm sorry, I'm talking about this all the time because I see Stephen and Fred and Yosef, there are a lot of men on the line, but if you're married, if you're not married, please God, you should be married soon. And I'm giving you a great free education, so why not? When it comes to women, they love to share their birth stories. And women always ask, so how was the labor? And she'll say, and I labor hours and hours and hours, and I almost died, right? They love to tell it. Why do they love to tell it? And they do it with a smile on their face, even though some of them actually might have really risked their life to do that because they feel they have a badge of honor on that shoulder. Do you know what I did? This baby, what I did to bring this life into this world? And the 9 months of sciatica and eating issues. I couldn't walk, I couldn't talk, couldn't sleep, right? I couldn't work. They love to talk about their sacrifice. You know why? Because it enforces within them how much they might own this child. And you know what they call the mother, right? Another name for her, the Jewish mother, is also called the Jewish smother. I'm very flexible. I don't care what you become. You can explore any routes in terms of careers you'd like. Any type of lawyer or any type of doctor that you want to become, I'm flexible. Nothing else outside that realm. You're laughing, Sandy. I don't know if that's a conversation you had with your grown children, but I do know that it's definitely a reputation that we have developed for ourselves. That we have these parameters in which we want our children to live under. Why? Because we want them to be a good reflection of ourselves, because we own them. We have a right to that opinion. And of course, the power in anything in this world has both a positive reflection and a negative reflection. That's what keeps the world balanced in its Kedusha. If we have a power for Kedusha, we have to have an equal and opposite power for that which trips us up. So for women, if we have the power to bring life into this world, we also have the power to destroy it. And that is the story of the tree. It is saying the power that we have to create and the power that we have to destroy. And not to let the parameters that Hashem has designed around that power to trip us up. And that's an interesting thing that when you look at the mitzvot of women that we still keep today, if we're going back thousands of years, since the time of our matriarch Sarah, who lit candles, made challah, and did mikvah, how is it possible, statistically speaking, that we even know that these mitzvot even exist? Because in certain times, we had to keep these mitzvot at great sacrifice. Lighting candles in our closet, picking through the ice to dip in a mikvah. And challah, well, that's easily disguisable often, but Shabbos that it's connected to is not. Somehow women were the keepers of these unique mitzvos. And how are they connected to her destiny and to her power? Well, they say that Adam was the challah of the world. He was the dough of the world. Hashem took the dust of the earth, he mixed it with the dew, and he blew within it a neshama, which is the neshimat Hashem, which we get the word neshama. And then the fire, which is the soul, is what baked it and solidified it. What does that sound like? We mix the flour with the water, we allow it to rise, and then we bake it in the oven to solidify it. That we are recreating that power that we have, reminding ourselves that this is something that we do. Even if we don't have children, we have a power to build humanity or to destroy humanity as women. And every man who has tuned in today should know this power that a woman has, this Herculean power. And the candle lighting we'll get to soon. I want to fast forward now. If I could talk to you for a week straight, we can go into every single woman, even the women who we don't talk about as often throughout the Torah, the women of the Hanukkah story, the women of the Purim story, the women of almost every single holiday that we keep, goodness gracious, it always has this woman that defies nature and somehow keeps the line, or that it or throws the what do you call it, the lifeline out into the Jewish people and brings them to salvation. So remember, we opened up by saying if we look at the entire 5 books of Moses as some type of like a one plot, one Harry Potter series, right? With a so what is the climax of the story? Some people would say Matan Torah, but I don't think that is so. So what did I do today? This is a woman who is obsessed with numbers and a woman who's obsessed with research. Unfortunately, my obsession with numbers is not matched with my capabilities with numbers, and therefore I won't give you an accurate number. But I called my husband's chavruta that he learns with every single morning to double check. I wanted to know how many times a day, and therefore try to calculate how many times a year, we mention the concept of Yetziat Mitzrayim, of the exit of Egypt. And ladies and gentlemen, if this is not an obsession, I don't know what is. Approximately 50 times a week, we mentioned Yetziat Mitzrayim. You do the math, that's 200 times a month. And then on top of that, we have to add in all the holidays where there are extra prayers. There's the Kiddush, then there's Kiddush again, then there's extra prayers, then there's the 3-day holidays that are attached to Shabbat. We're talking about thousands of times a year. We're bringing up this thing called Yetzias Mitzrayim. We're obsessed with it, obsessed. Much more so than the stories behind any other holiday. I would venture to say that that is shedding light on what is the climax of the story of the 5 books of the Chamishe Chumshei Torah. The Yetziat Mitzrayim is where we hit that rising action and we hit the plateau of the climax. And after that is what we call the falling action, the conclusion of the laws, and then finally entering into the land of Israel. So the climax has to include the main characters of the story, or the operative characters in the story, those who are the catalyst to bring the plot into fruition. Not to say that the women are the main parts of the story, but they are most definitely the catalysts of the ending of the story, or if not for them, never would have happened. Opening up with Chava, who seems to be like the limelight of the bringing down of humanity. What we see from her point forward is that it is the women who saw something that other people didn't see, that they have that 6th sense, and they are willing to bet on that 6th sense at risk of their lives. And if you look at the story in Mitzrayim, you will see that if not for the women, I look at it like a volleyball game almost like that game of hot potato, where like you have to throw it to another person, or to throw it to another person, or to throw it to another person, and the link in the chains cannot break. Because from the very opening of the scene, when it comes to the leader of the Jewish nation, Amram, and I'm assuming that there are people on the line who are quite familiar with the story and the important role of the women, but maybe they didn't necessarily string them together in one beautiful tapestry. When it opens up with the story of the women who are willing to sacrifice their lives and not only give birth to the children, but the midwives that assisted in the birth, this is not something to take lightly. This is the equivalent of a woman agreeing to give birth to a child in Auschwitz or worse. The sound of a cry would mean the end of her life. I am not a woman who is on that level of sacrifice. And when the rabbis of the generation, namely the chief rabbi Amram, said, enough is enough, and he created a halachic ruling, so to speak, prior to when halacha exists, he created a ruling within the Jewish people that all men should separate from their wives, so that they should not, God forbid, endanger their lives. Why? They saw with their own two. They heard the screams of the woman in labor. They heard the cry of the child, and they heard the marching of the Egyptian taskmasters and bashing through the doors, ripping, quite literally, ripping the child from the womb of the mother, and immediately either snapping the neck of the child or throwing the child in the Nile. Now the child's scream is replaced by the mother's screams of agony. that she so desperately wanted to bring this child into the world and worked so hard to do it, risking her physical life, only to be met with such devastation. My sister-in-law, who has, God bless her, has 12 children, her 10th child was a stillborn. She woke up one morning and it was apparent there was blood in her bed, and they rushed her to the hospital, and the doctors told her there was no longer a heartbeat. And I will tell you that because of her particular medical situation, they advised her to give birth naturally to this child because a C-section would be too dangerous for her. She says, Adina, do you know what it's like to give birth to a child that's already dead? She says, there's no pain that you cannot describe with words, the pain. Not only that, but she had to go through it naturally because she was also medically sensitive to, she had a terrible reaction to having any type of severe pain medication. And so therefore, epidurals, thank you, Fanny, epidurals, and therefore she had to go through it naturally. And all of her children, since her first child, was natural because of her allergic reaction. It's like God stacked it up against her. And my husband, who was very close with her and was her little brother at the time, was right outside the room to be a support to her, and heard her screams of agony. And she's screaming at some point when finally the baby is born, she screams, God, you owe me one. And the next year she gave birth to twins. True story, true story. It is that story that I hold dear in my heart, even though it's just a tiny fraction of what the women in Egypt had to go through. And it's told that they were given birth to children by leaps and bounds, all 6 at a time, quickly. Why? Risking their life over and over again. Why did the midwives, who were from the Shevet Levi, which means they weren't even in slavery, they weren't even at the, they weren't imposed upon in terms of the taskmaster's conditions, they elected to go be these midwives and risking their lives by not killing the children, according to what Paro had told them. And then it continues. Ladies, this potato is brought from the women, whether it was Miriam and Yocheved, who after the husband separated for them said, no, you're worse. You're worse than Paro because you're killing both the men and the women. And they went and seduced their husbands in the field. They used a different type of power. Did they go and say, you're wrong, and you don't have emunah? How can you not have emunah in Hashem? How can you not have belief? Come on, you're the chief rabbi, and you've given up hope already? Not one time do we see any type of interaction like that. We don't see any conversation. We see that they approach their power with love, with affection, knowing that the power of even manipulation is a key that they hold. And they seduce their husbands to produce the very generation that will see the Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea, and the giving of the Torah. They produce those kids. It's so remarkable. Not only that, but we see that the very daughter of Paro, named Batya, which means the daughter of God because she converted. If not for her, the entire story wouldn't have happened. There we go. The chain is linked from woman to woman, where they're all playing this game as a team. Did she risk her life by taking Moshe in? Oh, quite frankly, yes. She risked her life as well. And then the most beautiful part of the entire story, and this is where I want to really I want us to understand what it means to be able to see. I'm going to go, actually, I don't know if we're going to have time to have too many questions at the end because I want to bring this all home, but I'll tell you something fascinating. If I was going on a trip and I take my kids up to Orlando, if I was going to go on a trip, what would I pack? The first thing I would think to pack was food. And what we do know is that the women, for some reason, like we know that the tradition tells us that they didn't have time for the bread to rise. What were they so busy packing if not for peanut butter and jelly sandwiches? Well, we do know that as they finally go through the waters and the waters crash in, on their very enemies, the enemies that have enslaved them, not for just their generation, but for the generation before and the generation before them, which means all they knew was slavery. They knew nothing else. Unlike the prisoners in Auschwitz or other concentration camps, where they had some type of reality that they could dream for and hope for. And my children, they keep saying, after coronavirus is over, after coronavirus, because they've tasted the freedom of going to the park and getting together with your friends and going out to eat for pizza. These are things that we take for granted. They had a vision to look for. These women in Egypt didn't have that vision. Not only did their mamas not understand it, but their grandmothers for hundreds of years never understood what the word freedom even meant. So that's where we see this magnificent thing that what did they pack? They packed instruments. Their bags were full, no room for food. God will take care of us. If he could take us out of Egypt, he'll take care of the food. Don't worry, Kinderlach, they said. What's most important is to take these instruments. And we know that as they started to clap their tambourines, the husbands turned around, they said, where's that sound coming from? Who's making that beautiful music? And they realized it was the women who packed back in slavery. They understood, they saw the light in the dark. There's a bracha that we say every morning. This bracha is like, we must have said it 100 times, and all of you are shul goers, and the more you go to shul, the more you start to look at these prayers from a different eye. When we say the brachos in the morning, we say something interesting. We say the very first bracha, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher nasan l'sechvi vina. The sechvi is translated as either heart or the rooster. The sechvi gives understanding to the rooster. L'havchin bein yom uvein laila. Ready for this? To distinguish between day and night. And I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, what is this distinction between day and night that we have to open up all of the morning blessings with? Because the rooster rises before the dawn. The rooster rises well before the sun begins to rise. The rooster knows when the sun is coming before any of the other animals and creatures of the world rise. And the rooster wakes up those creatures to greet the dawn. And when we look in Eishes Chayil, which is what we sing every single Friday night, the song that is supposed to epitomize the power of that woman. We say, Ta'ama ki tov sachra, she discerns that is good. Remember that word tov? We open up the whole class with the word tov. She discerns the real good, not the good that feels good, or the good that looks good, or the counterfeit type of good, the good that's the sushi and wine on the beach type of good, or the good that it absolves us from rising to the occasion because it's just too hard to do that which is good. And we tell ourselves, let's just take the easier road. She discerns the good that was created before they ate from the tree. And that's her enterprise. I love that it uses that word sachra, it's her business. Lo yechbeva laila neira. Her lamp is not distinguished at night. At night, she's got her lamp going. She sheds light in the darkest of times. And that's why, if we want to explore why one of those 3 mitzvos is candlelighting, why is it so important for her to light that candle in the home? It's because before the sun even sets, she prepares. I would venture to say that probably the only people on the planet that light candles during the day are Jewish women. Why light a candle during the day? I would venture to say that we're the obsessive candle lighters because now we have electricity. Why are we still lighting candles if you could just flip a switch? Because it's a deeper light than just the light that for the eyes to be able to see our home. It's the light of clarity. It's the light of emunah, of bitachon, of understanding that there is always a light at that end of the dark tunnel. That a dawn will come even when it's an unfathomable type of salvation. And that's why for years we've still been lighting those candles at great sacrifice. And that's why the very last mitzvah of what we call mikvah, says the rabbis, is tikva, is hope. What is the definition of hope? Hope means that you choose to align your thoughts with that which is not what you see now, but that which you can imagine for a future. It is throwing a lifeline to the future and saying, I choose to think about that. And I know it exists. Tikva is a woman's power. And that's why women today if you want to really tap into the deepest essence of your wives, gentlemen, of your daughters, gentlemen, if you look at them, it's such a crime that our culture have learned to objectify women in such an abrasive way, when the beauty and the power of women is in our real strength to be able to carry all of humanity to a beautiful dawn, to see the end. And without the women, says the rabbis, it is the women who will be the catalyst for when Mashiach comes, for the ultimate Yitzia of what we know, to be able to lead us all into Israel one day. And guess what I'm going to pack? I'm going to pack my instruments, because they've got plenty of food there anyway. What do you need food when they've got hummus and tahina and everything that they've got? I want to thank all of you for tuning in. I want to thank everybody for taking the time out of their busy day, and I know it's good weather outside. So I want to thank you so much for joining in, and I hope one day that we'll be able to meet in person and be able to truly to create a relationship. And I'll just end very quickly. If you have any daughter or granddaughter or anybody that's in a college campus in Florida, please tell them that we exist. We have thousands of students that are involved in learning in similar classes like this. Even now during coronavirus, tons of classes going on. And we'd love to get them involved and to partner with you, send every one of them our way. And thank you so much for joining. If there are any questions, I don't know if we have any few minutes left. I don't think we do. I think I went over time, 4 minutes. But if you have any questions,
we have a few minutes. If anyone has any questions, first I want to thank you very much. Very, very inspiring message. And thank you for that uplifting message, especially during these times. And God willing, next year we'll have a chance to meet you in person at the Palm Beach Synagogue. And thank you for the wonderful work you do for the Jewish people, spreading Yiddishkeit, especially to the younger generations. And as Rebbetzin Adina Stilerman said, if you have kids on college campuses, make sure to connect them to Yehudi. If anyone wants to unmute their mic and ask any questions, feel free to do so.
Or just unmute your mic to say hello. I have to hear Amy's voice, because Amy and Renee, I've been looking at you the whole time, and it's been these beautiful faces, and I'd love to just say hi. Do you mind?
Hello, Adina. Hello, Adina.
Hi, it's Renee, but I do have one question.
I'm so sorry. Yes, go
Not
ahead.
a problem. Everybody says Renee, and I'm from Montreal, which makes it even worse. I don't know why my mother called me Renee. You know? She could have called me anything.
Oh,
Anyways, I have one question, because we were talking about it on Friday night after Jeannie lit candles with us online. Okay, we were you're supposed to be allowed to light 18 minutes after Shabbat begins, or is it only 18 minutes before Shabbat begins? That's part one of my question. But part two of my question is, Deanie was talking about this, and that's where we were a little confused about. I'm sorry that Sandy got offline, because she and I were talking about it, about lighting candles before sundown to make sure you don't miss out or something. Can you clarify that?
Sure. So I'm going to actually answer your first question second, and then your second question first, with your permission. Okay. So the definition of Shabbat, even though if I would ask you, I'm going to ask you to fill in. Shabbat is the day of fill in the blank.
Rest.
Very good. Yes. So actually, that's a sentence that we, for some reason, cut short. Shabbat is the day of rest from creative activity, which means I, on Shabbat, am allowed to schlep 15 6-footer tables up 10 flights of steps in order to set up a big meal, which I'm sure you have a very bustling synagogue. I heard from one of my colleagues, that this is probably one of the most successful synagogues in South Florida. And I will just mention that he did say it's due to the popularity of Rabbi and Rebbetzin Shiner. That was what he told me to preempt me for your crowd. He said that so if they do a large meal, so there's a lot of work that entails. So it doesn't seem very restful, yet on Shabbat, one is not allowed to flip on a light switch. So that kind of breaks our notion that it's the day of rest, but it's a rest of creative activity, that which are the powers that mankind uses to master the world, where we change realities, where we change nature. Fire is one of the things that we're not allowed to do on Shabbat. We don't light fire. Because when fire is used to build, think about how man has used fire. The entire culinary industry was created with fire. The entire construction industry, we use fire. We actually, entire chemistry, all of chemistry is the bonding of chemicals through fire. Fire is one of the very obvious forces of the 39 principles of creative activity. That means one is not allowed to light their candles past sundown, because once sundown comes, they're not allowed to candles, which is, by the way, that's why the tradition for when we light Hanukkah candles, we say the blessing first and then we light the candles, right? But when it comes to Hanukkah, Shabbos candles, we first light the candles and then we say the blessing. Because some say that once you actually say the blessing, you brought in Shabbat, and then you can't light the candles because you're not allowed to strike that match. So we light the candles first, and then we say the blessing to bring in Shabbat. And then we cover our eyes in between those two traditions because we don't want to enjoy the candlelight, because that's the third part of the mitzvah, is the enjoyment of the peace in the home and that serenity and the light that comes into the home. So that being said, that's why there's a sense of urgency to light the candles before Shabbat comes in, because then you'll be breaking Shabbat in order, which is such a shame. It's like breaking Shabbat at trying to keep Shabbat. You hear? Now, your second question was, what's the 18-minute rule? And the 18-minute rule was that when you look, I'm sure your shul has a newsletter or a website that you can go to, and I know they probably have candle lighting times. So candle lighting times is when we are instructed to light the candles, and it's 18 minutes before actual sundown, which is the very last moment that you can light. So someone like me, who is ashamed to admit that I am a last minute person, I creep into those 8 minutes, but those 18 minutes are really there to be able to set the tone of candle lighting, which is that it's meant to be a loving embrace. So when I was dating my husband, so I know that I was also that last minute person. So imagine when he's going to show up on the date to pick me up at 3 o'clock, what was I doing at 2:58? I was like quickly like blow drying, and I was like driving myself absolutely crazy. Was I rested when my husband picked me up? I was in such a kerfuffle that there's no way that I could bond with him. It took like 20 minutes, namely probably 18 minutes, to calm myself down and really connect with him. And if we look at Judaism as, God forbid, a religion and not a relationship, and Shabbos is the bedroom and the intimacy of that relationship, where we want to calm ourselves, light the candles, and have that moment to breathe, to welcome in that Shabbos queen. You'll see that it kind of, trying to keep to that 18 minutes before, really allows us to embrace Shabbos and bring it in a restful way, and not with that sense of last minute urgency. But I feel a little bit of a hypocrite even as I teach that, because it's something I strive for every single week, and I win and I lose. Each week I win some, I lose some. What can you do? Did that answer your question?
Yes, but I've heard that something about 18 minutes after you're still allowed to light. Is that not true?
At 18 minutes after the candle lighting time. So if it says in the website 6:01, which is, by the way, I give a class on Shabbat, and I talk about how the two times that you'll see such distinct times noted, like candle lighting is never 6 o'clock. It's always 6:01 or 6:02. And you know what else is it? Time of death. I used to work in the medical industry. Time of death is always noted as a very odd time. It's to the second, and there's not an accident that the two are both noted so precisely. So 6 o'clock, let's say, would be, because I'm bad at math, 6:01 would be the candle lighting time. 18 minutes after that is when the sun officially is So you have up until 18 minutes after the time that is mentioned on the website to be able to light your candles before you're breaking Shabbat while you're lighting candles. Got it?
Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
Amy, do you have a question?
No, I'm good. Very interesting.
Anything except for my political leanings and my weight. That's the rule of the question and answer session.
I have so much to think about now. I have to just absorb all this information.
I tried to cram in as much as I possibly could.
And I see you have a friend, you're friends with Chaya Weisberg in Jerusalem, one of my favorite people in this whole world.
Oh, are you on Facebook?
I am, and just Chaya was very good to me during a big situation in my life, and Heritage House took such great care of me, and just amazing memories of her and her husband Matan, and just, I see them every time I'm in Jerusalem, and I should be going in a few weeks, and unfortunately that's not going to happen now.
What a shame.
It's very nice to meet you, Adina.
Very nice to meet you. I hope we get to I hope we
I
get
want to
to.
say, share one thing about college campuses. My daughter went to University of Florida. My daughter is now 30. She lives in Israel with my grandson and my son-in-law. But when she was going to University of Florida, she got very involved with Rabbi Goldman at Chabad. And I got to tell you, I walked in there once on a Friday night. It's so important. There were 300 kids sitting around eating and singing, and I shouldn't tell Rabbi Goldman, but they were drinking. And it's just so important when you're in college to connect. When I was in college, there was no Chabad there. I only went to Hillel. But it's still, these college kids, if they connect to these Jewish organizations, they just stay out of so much trouble. My daughter became Shomeret Shabbat with them, and it was just like, it was and she had a huge Jewish education. She'd gone to day school and Jewish camps, and Rabbi Shiner knows my daughter because when she got married in Israel, he had to write a letter proving that, confirming that she was Jewish, or else they wouldn't have allowed her to get married. But it's just that connection in college, like the last piece just before they go off on their own, is so important. So your work is very, very important.
I feel it all the time. We have that sense of urgency all the time because you just see them being lost. And sometimes they come through our doors and they're like, oh, I haven't had Shabbat. We had this young French guy that came to our Shabbat table. I was like 60 people there. And at some point I'm not a chef. That's the one thing I cannot claim to be. And I know that after 120 years, my eternal Gan Eden, my eternal reward is going to be that I have my own personal chef, because that is the hardest part of my job. But I will say that this one French guy came and I served chicken soup, and he said, I have not had chicken soup in years. And I said, years? What do you mean? He says, I haven't been at a Shabbat table in years. He lives in South Beach. He works, he's a manager and a bodybuilder and a manager in a gym. And he's like, there's nothing. I just didn't think to do it. I was so caught up and busy. And when things like that happen, I wonder, he represents so many people. You have one person at your table represents hundreds of people that are not engaging. And therefore we need as many organizations as possible to reach out to all the different types of students, the more intellectual ones, the more emotional ones, the ones who love Shabbat, the ones who love trips. It's the reason why Israel recently set aside a huge amount of funds for the diaspora communities for college campus experiences. And Hillel and Chabad and our organization as well are all getting significant help from Israel, because they recognize that we're connecting them to the land, and they recognize that all of them have a place. But I know who you're talking about, the Chabad rabbi, and I've heard about his legendary Shabbat table.
Unbelievable.
You're like the fifth person who has mentioned his Shabbat table, and I feel like that's real magic that's going on. Every one of those people is staying connected. And it's in many ways, I feel like that Jewish mama. You know what? Can I end with one quick story? I just feel like it's such a great story to end with. The Jewish mama used to they say first impressions are very challenging to break. The studies talk about how when they set people up with first impressions, it took years. And I believe that last impressions are even harder to break. Last impressions, what do I mean by that? So this is a beautiful story. I should have even said that before a few people signed off, but it's recorded and some people will. So in 1919, in a little town called Kshanif, it's a city that's right off the highway between Krakow and Auschwitz, just literally off that, if you've ever been to Poland. And if not, ask Rabbi Shiner to arrange a trip to take you to Poland, because it's just a remarkable life-changing experience. But right off of that highway is this town called Kshanif, and there's a woman named Leah who had 6 little children, and her husband once came to her and asked her. He said that there was a mission that was leaving, and they were Galicia, what do they call it? It's a type of Hasidim. I forgot what type of Hasid they were, but I think it's called Galicianer, I don't remember, but this Chassid says there's a mission of Hasidim that are going over to that was then known as Palestine, to build up the land. And he says, I want to go, and I'll send for you after we build up like a community. I'll send for you. And you could see there was a hesitation in her face. And then she says, you have my permission to go. Leave her with 6 little kids. So many weeks later, he was preparing for his trip, and then they were standing by the train station, she surrounded by her 6 children, and there were tears coming down her face, and you could see she was choking back those tears. And I can imagine that this man, her husband, looked back, his name was Avram, looked back at her and thought that she was crying because he would miss her, that she would miss him. But little did he know, and he never would find out, that she found out that she was expecting their 7th child. And she didn't want to tell him because she knew that if she told him, he wouldn't want to go anymore. And she wanted him to carry on that mission. And so she waved him goodbye. And they wrote letters back and forth to each other until one, and I wish I got a hold of those letters, that's for sure. But one day she received a letter not from him, but from some type of organization. It said that your husband caught malaria in the swamps in northern Israel, and unfortunately he passed away. And so she gave birth just a short time afterwards in 1920 to her little son named Eliyahu. And Eliyahu, as he grew older, started to become aware of the fact that he was the only one out of all his friends, possibly in the whole town, that didn't have a father to sit next to in shul, didn't have a father to help him with his bar mitzvah, didn't have a father to learn with him Shabbos afternoon. He would cry to his mama. And he would say, why, mommy? Why don't I have a father? She would whisper in his ear, Sheifala, we say in Yiddish, which means little lamb. Sheifala, you don't have a father because your father was a great man. He gave up his life for the land of Israel. Not one of your friends can claim that they have a father that would give up their life for the land of Israel. You come from greatness and you are greatness. And she would tell him over and over again, whisper, your father gave up his life for the land of Israel. You come from greatness and you are greatness. And later on, when this little boy grew up and he was, like 17 or 18 years old, he said, I want to leave yeshiva because you're trying to support all of us. I want to work and help support you. He was the youngest of his 7 children. She said, not only do I not want you to leave yeshiva, but the next day, she opened up his hand and she handed him a bag of money. And he noticed that her very last piece of jewelry, the wedding ring that she had on her finger, was gone. So he knew where that money came from. And she said, go to Krakow. There's an amazing yeshiva for Iluyim, for people who are great giants, people have potential to really learn. Go to that yeshiva. I want you to not immerse yourself even more, and I'll keep sending you money. And he did. He hopped in a train, went a half-hour away to Krakow. I think it's only 20 minutes actually away to Krakow. When the war broke out, what did he do immediately? He jumped onto the train to go back to take care of his mother, and he never made it. He was seized and he was taken captive, eventually going from concentration camp to concentration camp to concentration camp. And he said wherever he went, he would think about where he came from. His father, he comes from greatness, he is greatness, and he's going to survive, and he's going to persevere. Maybe even land up in this holy land, in the land that his father gave up his land. The words of his mother were chirping in his ear wherever he went, and he never was unified with his mother or any of his siblings. Only one of his siblings survived. Found him way after the war was over. Now, how do I know this story? Because that's my Zaidi. My Zaidi Eliyahu told me this story when I was getting married to my husband, and I wanted to go to Israel. And I was debating, should I go, should I not? I wanted to go to study there with him during a kollel. I was like, I don't know, Bubby, what do you think? And my Zaidi chipped in, he says, you come from greatness, you are greatness. Let me tell you a story about who your great-grandmother was and how much she was so proud of the fact that her husband gave up his life for the land of Israel. And if you could just hop on an El Al plane and you're not going, shame on you, Adina, he said. And I'll tell you something fascinating. Such a beautiful thing to take note of, that she sacrificed to send him off to yeshiva. She sacrificed. She really sent messages chirping in his ear that went from generation to generation to generation. Now, I only know her name. I don't know her mother's name. Most people will not know their great-great-grandmother's names. They know their grandmother, they know their great-grandmother. They don't know their great-great-grandmother's names. And that's a sobering thought, that my great-great-grandchildren may not know who Adina Stilerman ever was. But you know what they do know? They know the voices. They know what they teach our children. That's why at Har Sinai, that's why at Mount Sinai, God said, Kol Tamar LeBeit Yaakov, give the Torah to who? Says Rashi, to the women first. Women, aren't the men the ones who learn the Torah? No, Give the Torah to the women first, because that will ensure they're the ones who whisper in the ears of the next generation and the children the love and the sacrifice that it takes, because law it disintegrates quite quickly unless it comes with that sacrifice and that relationship that only a woman can do. And it is attributed to the fact that the Torah was given to the women first, that here today on Zoom, on right after Mother's Day, whatever it is, today's date, right after, thousands of years later, we'll start learning that Torah. Still, the longevity of Torah was attributed to women. I'll let you go with that thought. Thanks for tuning in. Have a blessed
Thank you again. Is that who your son Elio is named after?
Adina, do you have your email, or someone can
anybody wants to connect with me at any point in time for speaking engagements or for whatever they need, or to say hello for questions, I don't know, whatever it is. I told you the only things I don't do are my weight and politics. You can reach out to the Shiners. They have everything.
Okay, great.
Or you can reach out to me on Facebook or stilerman@gmail.com with 1 L, whatever it is. Have a blessed evening.
Thank you again. We really appreciate it. Is that who your son Elio is named after? Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you.